Curious Lloyd.
It's comforting to pretend that real-life crime plays by the same rules as TV, and that sooner or later, every killer is caught. Unfortunately, some deranged murderers are never found. What happened to them, you ask? Maybe they switched hobbies. Maybe they slipped in the shower and broke their necks. Or maybe they are hiding in your wardrobe right now. But obviously, not every single one of them. The Doodler killed as many as 14 people in the 70s and got away with it because they were gay. The Doodler. His name came from his tendencies to sit at bars and nightclubs and charm his victims by sketching them, before leading them off to be stabbed to death. If you're wondering how he remains at large, despite being seen in public places, now's the part where I tell you that these were all gay bars in San Francisco in 1974 and 1975. That's not a time period when law enforcement or society in general were on the best terms with the LGBT community, to put it mildly anyway. The Doodler has been credited with as many as 14 victims, although it's likelier he was only responsible for around 5 or 6. It's possible the other murdered gay men were rolled into his case incorrectly, or because, you know, more killers means more paperwork. The first killing was in 1974. By 1977, the police had put together a composite sketch of the killer and determined a suspect. They also had some witnesses, including someone who had been out and about to sleep with a man who matched the killer's description, only to reconsider when a knife fell out of his coat. The police were fairly certain they had the right guy, but he walked away free because no witnesses were willing to publicly testify. None other than Harvey Milk explained why, telling the AP that the witness probably feared the unemployment social rejection combo that came along with being outed. It didn't help that in the same years of the killings occurred, some San Francisco Police Department officers liked to cruise around undercover, pick up gay men, and then arrest them, at one point beating a suspect so badly he suffered brain damage. So yeah, not the most approachable people in the world. If the Doodler's still alive today, he would be in his 60s. He told a witness he was studying commercial art, and the police described him as potentially being a quiet, intelligent middle-class man who had mental difficulties involving sex. But at least violence against LGBT people is taken way more seriously today, because they are now at a higher risk than any other group of being victims of hate crime. The Oakland County child killer case is even more messed up than it sounds. There's no way to sugarcoat the story of someone called the Oakland County child killer. Between February 1976 and March 1977, 4 children in Michigan were kidnapped and subsequently found dead. All had been bathed and left in clean clothes, which is a very disturbing calling card, but not as disturbing as the next part. One of the victims' mothers appealed for a kidnapped son to be released, saying that she wanted to feed him one of his favourite meals of fried chicken. When his body appeared, a post-mortem revealed that he'd been fed fried chicken before being killed. This, naturally, kicked off a massive investigation. A mysterious man named Alan wrote a rambling, poorly spelled letter to a local psychiatrist, claiming to know the killer, saying he actually loved children, and explaining that his motivation boiled down to Vietnam man. Alan talked to the psychiatrist on the phone and sounded genuinely frightened, but he didn't show up to a meeting and was never heard from again. And that was but one of the 12,000 tips that the police received, so keep that in mind the next time you're tempted to complain about the state of your inbox. Another suspect was Christopher Bush, a convicted paedophile, as 2 of the victims had been sexually assaulted. He hailed from a wealthy family. Bush had a car that resembled one a witness spotted. He had bloody ropes laying around his home and owned a drawing of a tortured boy which eerily resembled one of the victims, which is online, but you'll have to look it up yourself. Oh, and Bush also committed suicide in 1978, after which the murders stopped, so that's probably the guy, right? Well, that's what many family members of the victims figured, until it came out in 2012 that his DNA didn't match any of the evidence and the cops considered him innocent of this particular crime anyway. Besides Bush, a whole bunch of shady people with criminal backgrounds have been associated with the crime at one point or another, but ultimately couldn't be tied to it. A 2011 DNA test on a strand of hair helpfully narrowed down the pool of suspects to 1% of the Caucasian population in America. The Long Island serial killer littered a whole beach with bodies. The nicest thing I can say about this case is, well, at least most of the victims were adults. In May 2010, sex worker Shannon Gilbert made a panicked call to 911 before vanishing in an area of Long Island known as Gilgo Beach. In December, a detective found her body, and then someone else's, and then someone else's, and then someone else's. All 4 victims had been reported missing, and all were women in their 20s who had worked as escorts off Craigslist. Over the following year, a 5th missing sex worker and 5 more unidentified bodies were found in the same area, along with literal bits of pieces of other people. A district attorney commented on this and said, "It is clear that the area around Gilgo Beach has been used to discard human remains for some period of time, which presumably sent local property values plummeting. The fact that the beach is so secluded, tricky to navigate, and full of nasty debris made it an ideal body dumping ground for who knows how long. One skull was linked to legs that were found elsewhere in 1996, while other victims have been reported missing as late as 2010. And, in all that time, there have been a grand total of 0 leads. The most definitive clue anyone can offer is that the killer had access to burlap sacks, which narrows it down to anyone with £5 and access to a general handy store. So, how do the police even know they are not dealing with 10 different killers with the creepiest timeshare ever? Well, one indicator is that someone repeatedly called one of the victim's teenage sisters from the victim's mobile phone to taunt her. Unfortunately, he was savvy enough to keep the call short, and that made them untraceable. The best anyone can offer is that the killer probably had some knowledge of police proceedings and what looks like a mundane life, complete with the possibility that they are killing when their wives and kids are out of town. But that's all educated guesswork, with less educated guesswork blaming everything from sex parties among to ultra-rich satanic rituals. The theories get weird in a hurry, which is what tends to happen when 10 bodies are discovered and all law enforcement can offer is, I don't know, is probably a white guy. Ironically, people now believe Shannon Gilbert wasn't a victim of a serial killer and may have drowned, but at least her 911 call helped them stumble across victims who otherwise might have never been found. Juarez is a paradise for serial killers targeting women. Juarez can be a nasty place at the best of times. In 2010, the city saw 3,776 murders during a spike in cartel warfare. However, the murders of women are especially brutal and so common that they had to invent a word for it, which is femicidio. According to the state government, 76 female murder victims in Juarez showed evidence of serial killings. Most were young, had the same eye color and hairstyle, were attacked while returning home from work, and had similar things done to them. One victim's family was only able to recognize their loved one by her blouse and rubber bands holding her ponytail. But don't worry, the police are on the case. So why? Mere days after 8 bodies were found near a busy intersection, 2 bus drivers were arrested and confessed after they had been tortured and threatened by police. Oh, and the head of forensics resigned in disgust, stating there wasn't a shred of evidence against them. This wasn't even the first time that police had thrown someone in jail and declared the problem solved, only for women to inconvenience their days by continuing to get murdered. So, who is responsible? Well, the head of the FBI's office in El Paso suggested that an American could be responsible, noting this would be an ideal killing field for a serial murder given the nature of the law enforcement response. Because, apparently, Mexico is a great holiday spot for both college kids on holidays and homicidal maniacs. Former diplomat William Bradford Bishop murdered his family with a sledgehammer and disappeared. Unlike the killers you've heard about so far, you may know exactly who this one is and what he did. There's no mystery here. A grand jury indicted him in 1976 based on what experts called a metric ton of evidence. The only thing we don't know is where the hell he went to. William Bradford Bishop spent years working abroad for the United States Foreign Office Service before settling into a desk job in Washington, D.C. after being passed over for a promotion in 1976. He very undiplomatically bought a sledgehammer, went home, and bludgeoned his wife, mother, and 3 sons to death. He then put their bodies into a car, drove to North Carolina, dug a shallow grave, and set them on fire. The detective who investigated the house, after a neighbour expressed their concern about not seeing the family around, called it the worst crime scene he had ever seen. And again, the bodies weren't even there. The bodies in the car were quickly found, but it took police time to connect the dots, during which Bishop simply vanished. There were 3 credible sightings of him in Europe. A former acquaintance claims she saw him in Stockholm in 1978. A former co-worker said he took a piss next to him in an Italian bathroom in 1979 and that he ran when challenged. Then again, that's the normal reaction when someone talks to you by the urinal. But also, another old neighbour says he was on a train platform in Basel in 1994. Europe makes sense. Bishop spoke 6 languages and had experience creating IDs and passports, which the Bourne movies have taught us are 90% of what it takes to survive out there. If Bishop is still alive today, the FBI, which has him on their top 10 most wanted list, believes he is. He would be 80. The FBI knows that he enjoys exercise and outdoor activities, knows how to fly a plane, and likes a scotch, wine, peanuts, and spicy food. They also created this creepy portrait to demonstrate what he might look like today. So if you live near a guy who loves peanuts and flies planes, he might be one of the most wanted men in the world. Or maybe it's just a random dude, and Bishop will never be found because sometimes horrible murderers win. Life's terrifyingly unpredictable.